Hey, what's up, everybody and everybody? What's up? It's Crystal. Welcome back to Fearfully Made, Faithfully Single. Okay, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever realized that the biggest obstacle standing between you and your calling or the person you think you're supposed to be wasn't another person? It wasn't money. It wasn't your age. It wasn't your education. Girl, it wasn't even the devil. It was you. Not because you wanted to fail or you woke up one morning and said, you know what, I'm just going to ruin my whole life, my whole future. But because somewhere along the way, you started believing something about yourself that God never said. And that's what I want to talk about today. Self-sabotage. Now, when we hear that phrase, we usually think about destructive habits or making bad decisions, but I think self-sabotage is much more subtle than that. So here's how I want to define it for today's conversation. Self-sabotage is agreeing with a story about yourself that contradicts what God has already said. Let me say that again. Self-sabotage is agreeing with a story about yourself that contradicts what God has already said. And I believe every one of us has done it. God says, I'll never leave you nor forsake you, but we convince ourselves we're alone. God says he has a purpose for our lives, but we convince ourselves we're ordinary. God opens a door and we start listing reasons why we shouldn't walk through it. God speaks and we argue. Now, if that sounds familiar, you're in good company, girl, because one of my favorite people in the Bible did the exact same thing. Okay, so go to Judges chapter 6. You may be driving right now or doing something else, but in your time of reading, I need you to go to Judges chapter 6. Start at verse 1, but our main character really comes into the story around verse 11. So let me give you a synopsis. Here we go. Israel had turned away from God, and because of their disobedience, the Midianites oppressed them for years. And they were afraid. They hid in caves. They even hid their food. They lived under constant fear because every time they planted their crops, the Midianites would come and take them. Okay, so here comes our main character, Gideon. That's the environment Gideon was living in. The Bible tells us Gideon was threshing wheat. Now, threshing wheat is a process of separating the wheat grain from the stalk. Okay, so he's doing that. They need to prepare the wheat because, they use the wheat to make bread so they can eat. But anyway, he's in a wine press hiding from the Midianites threshing wheat. Now think about that. He's hiding. Now he's just doing what he has to do to survive. He's providing for his family in secret because that's how dangerous life had become for them during that times. I'm telling you, it's so good. Go back and read it. Judges chapter 6. All right. So here comes the angel. The angel of the Lord appears, and listen to what happens next, because this is where I think many of us miss something. The angel doesn't start by talking about Gideon's circumstances. He doesn't start by talking about the Midianites. He doesn't even start giving instructions to Gideon. The first thing God addresses is Gideon's identity. The Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. Did you hear what he said? God called Gideon a mighty man of valor while Gideon was hiding. God didn't wait until Gideon defeated the Midianites. He didn't wait until Gideon had all this confidence. He didn't even wait till he felt courageous. He called him what he knew him to be before Gideon ever believed it about himself. Ooh, and that's how God works. He often talks to us about in the framework of who he's already designed and created you to be. Not that you're there yet, but he speaks to that person that he knows is already inside of you. Now, look at Gideon's response. That's why Gideon is my man. He does not say, thank you. He doesn't say, Lord, I receive that. He immediately starts arguing. If the Lord is with us, then why has all this happened to us? Then he starts talking about his family. Hey, my family is poor in Manasseh. I am the least in my father's house. And notice all this stuff. Everything Gideon was saying was true about his current circumstances. His family wasn't influential. He wasn't the strongest in his family. The oppression was real. The fear was real. His hiding was real. But then Gideon reached a conclusion that God never gave him. He assumed that those facts meant God couldn't use him. And that's where self-sabotage begins. Not with the circumstance, but with the conclusion. And I've been thinking a lot about that lately because something not so recent, well, actually pretty recent, happened to me and exposed my own heart. I applied for a job that I genuinely wanted. I mean, I was qualified for it. I had the experience for it. I prayed about it. I prepared for it. I mean, planned my outfit, got all my stuff together. I interviewed, I prayed, I hoped. I had the interview, and then I got notification that they had chosen someone else. Now, of course, disappointment is normal. And it's okay to grieve something that you really wanted. But what surprised me wasn't my disappointment. What surprised me was what I did next. Almost immediately, I started making wrong conclusions about myself. Stuff like, maybe I'm not as capable or experienced as I thought. Maybe the things that I consider valuable don't really matter. You see what happened there? The company rejected my application, but my mind started rejecting me. And girl, those are not the same thing. The company simply made a hiring decision. I turned it into an identity statement. And that's when the Holy Spirit checked me. He said, Crystal, who told you that? Who told you one rejection erased everything I've done in your life? Who told you one closed door canceled my purpose and plan for your life? Who told you that another person's decision gets to define your identity? Girl, God really got me together. I was doing it. Self-sabotage. And I wonder how many of us are doing exactly what Gideon and I did. We're taking real circumstances and drawing false conclusions. It sounds like I'm single, so something must be wrong with me. I didn't get promoted, so obviously I'm not good enough. My marriage ended. I'll never be whole again. Well, I failed this, so God must be finished with me. Wait a minute. Who finished those sentences? Because God certainly didn't. Sometimes we become our own greatest obstacle because we keep finishing sentences that God never started. Gideon kept looking at himself, but God was trying to point Gideon back to himself. The Lord answered Gideon with these words, "Surely I will be with thee." I love that God didn't spend time debating every excuse Gideon gave. He didn't say, "No, Gideon, you're actually more talented than you think." He didn't say, "Let me prove to you, Gideon, that you're popular." He didn't say, "Let me explain why your family background doesn't matter." God simply said, "I will be with thee," because his presence was always the answer. And maybe that's what some of us need to hear today. The answer isn't believing in yourself more. The answer is believing God more. Proverbs tells us, "Trust in the Lord with all thine heart and lean not to your own understanding." And that's exactly what Gideon was doing. He was leaning to his own understanding. He looked at his circumstances. He looked at his family. He looked at himself. God was asking him to look somewhere else. And that may be where some of us are today. We're leaning on our own understanding. We're letting one disappointment become an identity. We're letting a rejection become our definition. We're letting an unanswered prayer rewrite everything that God has already spoken. Girl, don't do that. I did that. Don't do that. Don't let one no become louder than God's word. The beautiful part about Gideon's story, this is why he is my main man, because God never withdrew his calling because Gideon struggled. That's why Gideon is my favorite character. He struggles with his identity and does it more than once. I so relate to that. But God was patient. He continued teaching him, strengthening him. God continued walking with him. And eventually, Gideon obeyed. Not because he suddenly became fearless, but because he finally trusted God more than he trusted his own conclusions. But here's something I noticed as I kept reading Gideon's story. Even after God spoke to him and promised to be with him and confirmed his word, Gideon still struggled. He asked for a sign. God graciously gave him one. He asked for another sign, and God graciously gave him another one. And I've heard people criticize Gideon for asking for the fleece. But I think if we're honest, the fleece is the thing, fleece, wool, lamb's wool that you put out. Go read Judges chapter 6. I'm telling you, you're going to love it. Start at 1 and get on down to 11. But 11 is where Gideon kicks in. But anyway, I've heard people criticize Gideon for asking for the fleece. But if we're honest, we've all laid out our fleece in one way or another. It sounds like, Lord, if this you. Lord, if it's you, when I go to church today, I need the word to just sit in my lap. I need it to feel like pastor is talking just directly to me. Lord, if you let this happen, if you let this phone call come in, or if you let this email come through, then I will know it's you, God. Lord, if when I go to this interview and I hear them say da 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 da, then I'll know that that's you. Sometimes that's a sincere desire for wisdom. But sometimes it's delayed obedience. Girl, you know you already heard what God said. And sometimes we're hoping he'll say something else. And I've had moments like that. Not because I wanted to deliberately disobey God, but because obedience, it can be uncomfortable. I'm sorry. It exposes our insecurities. It stretches us. It forces us to depend on God instead of ourselves. And that in itself can be scary. That's our internal struggle, depending on God, just depending on God for everything. We like to think that we have it together. We like to think that I got the experience, so I know I got to consult God on this. No, he wants us to come to him with everything. So here we go. After Gideon finally gathered together an army, Gideon has decided, yes, God, I'm going to obey you. I'm going to go ahead and get the army together and help us to fight the Midianites. He probably felt a little bit better because 32,000 men showed up. Now, remember up in the story, Gideon was talking about, I'm the least in my house and my family is not this and blah, blah, blah. So you can imagine his chest kind of poked out a little bit. 32,000 other men showed up to fight with you and said, yeah, man, we're going to go to war with you. 32,000. That made sense. We're going to war. Let's do some damage. We got 32,000 men. All right. But then God says something Gideon probably never expected. God says, the people that are with thee are too many. Too many. Lord, we're already outnumbered. How can there be too many? I know that just busted Gideon's little bubble. Now listen, he's already afraid in a wine press. Then he asked God to show him all these confirmations. Then he finally says, I'll do it. 32,000 men show up. You're feeling good about yourself. Okay, maybe this is the right decision. I'm feeling good. And then God tells you, we're going to cut this down. Ooh, that would make anybody shaky. Okay, so then God goes from 32,000. Then he cuts it down to 10,000. Then he cuts it down to 300. Can you imagine going from 32,000 to 300? The thing that made him feel secure was that he had a lot of men. Now God is taking him down to 300. But God's promise never changed. I will be with thee. And the promise was enough. And I wonder if that's where some of us are today. We're asking God, we're praying. We're praying now. We're talking to the Lord. But maybe we're talking about the wrong things. We say increase our confidence. While God is not necessarily increasing your confidence in yourself, but He's increasing your dependence on Him. We're asking God to take everything out that makes us uncomfortable. But God is using those things that make you uncomfortable to teach you to trust God. Sometimes we think we need more experience, more money, more connections. I know I've said this a lot recently, more followers. Meanwhile, God is saying what you have, which is me, is enough. That doesn't mean that you'll never have every answer. It doesn't mean that you'll never be nervous. It doesn't mean that every door you're going to go to is going to automatically open. It doesn't mean any of that. It means wherever God sends you, He's going to be with you as you go and already there when you get there. That's the difference. You know, the older I get, the more I realize that faith isn't pretending disappointment doesn't hurt. That job rejection, ooh, that hurt. I can't pretend that it did. I was disappointed. I had already started mapping things out in my mind. I really hoped that things would have turned out differently. But disappointment is not the same thing as defeat. Disappointment is an event. It happens, it's a blip in your history. Defeat becomes a decision. That's a mindset. And maybe you're listening today after your own disappointment. It might not have been a job. It might have been a relationship or a friendship that ended, a doctor's report that did not go the way you wanted, a ministry opportunity that you messed up. Not that you missed, you messed it up. You might have really made a big mistake, or a dream that never happened, or it happened, but it didn't turn out the way that you wanted. Can I tell you something? Don't let one moment become your identity. Don't let one closed door make you question everything God has already done in your life. Go back to His word. Go back to what He actually said about you. Not what fear said, not what your insecurity said, not what even other people said. What did God say about you? Because that's where your stability is found. One thing I appreciate about Gideon is that God never called him based on how Gideon saw himself. God called Gideon based on what God intended to do through him. And that's true of us too. God is not looking for perfect people. He's looking for willing people. People who will trust Him enough to take the next step even while they're still growing, hurting, and struggling. So how do we fight self-sabotage? First, separate facts from conclusions. The fact may be the door closed. The wrong conclusion is that you'll never have another opportunity. Those aren't the same things. The fact may be that someone rejected you. The wrong conclusion is that you're unworthy, unlovable. Not the same thing. The fact may be that you're still waiting. The wrong conclusion is God doesn't care and He's forgotten about you. Number 2, ask yourself a simple question. What has God actually said? Not how do I feel or fear what other people are saying. What has God said to me in His word? Because His word is the truth. Our emotions change. His word does not. Finally, you can't remember anything else. Obey the last thing God told you to do. You don't have to figure out the next 10 years of your life today. Gideon didn't know everything that would happen. He simply took the next step of obedience, and then the next one, and then the next one. And that's how faith grows. Not all at once, one act of obedience at a time. So, hey, before we go, I want to leave you with one challenge this week. Pay attention to the stories you're telling yourself. You hear yourself saying, I'll never do, or I'm not enough, or God can't. Stop. Ask yourself, did God say that, or did I say that? Because if God didn't say it, don't believe it. Hey girl, if today's episode encouraged you, share it with somebody who may be doing some self-sabotage and they may not realize it. Help them. Or go back and listen to this and help yourself. And if you're looking for practical, biblical encouragement, couple things you can do. Number one, keep listening to the podcast every week. And number two, go and check out my digital guide, The Content Single Woman Blueprint. You'll find the link in the show notes. Girl, thank you again for spending time with me. And until next time, don't you allow your circumstances to rewrite what God has already spoken about your life. I love you. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.